Hello and welcome back to the Double Clutch podcast. I'm one of your usual hosts, Mike Miller. Once again, I'm joined by perhaps the only Nick still in action this summer, hoops related wise. It's Mr. Nick Whitfield. How goes it?
Good. I think still in action is probably a generous description of my basketball abilities, but I'll take it.
Well, still in action and at least you're still talking about the league sense, unlike the rest of the New York-based franchise. But anyway, before I start going down that rabbit hole again, some quick housekeeping. If you're not already following us on social media, please do so at Double Clutch UK on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you're not on our Discord, please go and join that. The server is discord.me/doubleclutch. And if you are listening to this rather than watching it live on Twitch, guess what? We put this out on Twitch now. So go check it out, twitch.tv/doubleclutchuk. So since we last spoke, we've had real basketball that means something. How are you enjoying it so far, Nick?
It's actually quite surreal in terms of I just got used to the scrimmages again, and it almost I had to kind of flip a switch mentally to even understanding that the game's actually meant something again.
It's really, really odd. And of course, we're getting the early tip times. And as we're speaking right now, perhaps for the first time in Double Clutch podcast history, we have a game going on live whilst this is happening. In fact, it might have just... No, is it just ended? I just had to peer around my light. There's about 40 seconds left in the Heat versus Raptors game. And then we've got two more games tipping off shortly thereafter. It's just madness. I can't get my head around this side of things at all. Usually we complain that it's on so late at night and we're catching up the next day, and now here it is right in our faces. It's amazing. So there's lots going on. Today there's a lot of news that has come out. NBA coaches voted on their Coach of the Year, and it was a tie between Coach Bud of the Bucks and Billy Donovan from OKC. Nick Nurse was one vote shy of making it a three-way tie for Coach of the Year. So, according to the coaches, Bud and Donovan are Coach of the Year. Do you think that's accurate, fair, or would you have gone somewhere else?
I think that's. I don't think it. I think anyone else would be generous, but I think Nurse should be in there as well. I mean, the job he's done with the Raptors losing Kawhi and what he's managing to squeeze out of the other guys, and he just seems like he's going to be one of those coaches in the NBA who always maximizes what he gets from his players. There's a few who I think fit that sort of bill. Rick Carlisle is one for me as well, who has actually taken a little bit of heat in the last few days, weirdly, but I always feel like he gets everything he can out of his roster. He just, for the last few years, hasn't had the best roster necessarily. But yeah, I think those three are the main ones for me. I'm not sure I'd throw anyone up on that level. How about you, Mike?
For me, Nurse should have won it. I just think how creative he's been, and if you lose a Finals MVP and still somehow manage to get yourself back into contention to the point where they're the second in the conference, and I think I saw a stat come out earlier, for the ninth straight year they've beat their Vegas over under target, and that's phenomenal after losing someone like Kawhi anyway. To do it again this year, there are a few names that I think probably deserve honourable mentions, but not necessarily the crown. Nate McMillan, I think he's done a fantastic job in Indiana this season. Terry Stotts, I mentioned it the other week, and maybe there's a little bit of homerism here, but to keep them within sniffing distance of the playoffs with the injuries they've dealt with has been quite, well, it's been excellent in my opinion. Mike Malone getting the Nuggets in second, but the big one for me, Taylor Jenkins, who's managed to, out of nowhere, 35-year-old head coach has made Memphis a team that, well, I say he has. Obviously, Jar's a big influence there, but he's kept them ahead of the curve and back in playoff contention.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. And just while we're on Memphis, worth shouting out, piece on the site went live today on Memphis, looking about whether they're being sort of overlooked by a lot of people, and I think that kind of fits in whether it's the team or the coaching staff and the job they've done this year.
Yeah, there is certainly a strong narrative at the minute that Memphis probably won't be the eighth seed. It's not about Memphis going to keep it. It's all about who is taking that spot. So, it's an interesting one. Memphis shouldn't be there. Let's be honest. They shouldn't be. They shouldn't be this good this soon with this roster. You've got a rookie lead. How often does a rookie point guard lead a team to relative success? And here he is, Ja Morant, making this team. Do you know what? Actually, this is a weird tangent we're already going on now. For a long time, everyone talked about how the Grizzlies were underrated when we had the grit and grind era. Gasol, Conley sort of duo, the Zach Randolph. Do you think now somehow Memphis is being talked about more, despite the fact it has theoretically less talent / established stars, compared to what it was when it had a core of solid stars and a playoff contender?
I can see where you're going with that, and I think the way people consume the NBA now has a big factor in that, in terms of social media plays such a big role in how people follow. Excuse me. That Ja Morant being one of the most watchable guys in the league right now does a lot for that. The grit and grind era, as good as they weren't necessarily the most social media highlight friendly team. So I think accompanied by I think they did well with the team they had back then, but it's actually almost built up this expectation that a Memphis team is ultimately going to fall short, which is a bit unfair now that they've sort of turned over and rebuilt already. But I think the other thing that's true that I was thinking about earlier today actually is how the focus has been so much on Ja Morant that you almost forget how good Jaren Jackson Jr. is and how he was considered before Morant joined the team. You never really hear him talked about now, despite how good he is on both ends.
Yeah, I mean, he was the reason they felt comfortable letting Gasol go at the time they did, because they felt that he was ready to step into that role, and that's a huge testament, because that's a huge shadow to fill. And Jaren Jackson Jr. is just he dipped a bit at the start of this year, but he is an extremely good power forward, and that's one of the most exciting pairings or tandems that you could have as a cornerstone for the franchise, with sort of the next 10 years in sight. That's a really solid duo. But we're not actually going to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. That wasn't the plan anyway.
Think that's what we're seeing a lot of right now is outside of the Knicks, obviously, who just want to sign every power forward. You're seeing teams look for that sort of guard forward or guard big combo in, you've got Doncic and Porzingis. You have Morant and Jackson. You have Simmons and Embiid. You have a lot of kind of good pairs there that I think work well together. It seems to be a little bit of a trend.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. More news to get to. So the NBA has tweaked its testing policy. Another Woj bomb. Good to have Woj back from his suspension. So essentially, at the minute, if a inconclusive test result comes back, which is approximately 5 in every 1,000, a player needs to wait 48 hours. But with the playoffs approaching, they're looking to cut that down to 24 hours. The player must test negative in an immediate retest upon receiving the inconclusive test, and then return for another negative test within 60 minutes of the scheduled tip-off of his team's next game. So you have to test twice negative, even if you come back inconclusive. It seems like a no-brainer to me. I don't think they're being overly reckless with this decision. We will get an announcement either today or tomorrow. They usually tend to come out about this time in the evening to say that for the third week straight they've got 0 results. But what do you think on the NBA taking the decision to reduce the amount of time you needed to wait for 2 negatives?
I think it's a sign of how increasingly confident the NBA is with the infrastructure they've built and how well everything's being managed and contained. And to be honest, I am completely surprised at how well everything has seemed to go. You only have to remember the MLS tried to did end their season in Disney right before the NBA, and they had two separate entire teams have to remove themselves from the tournament because of positive tests. So the fact the NBA continues to do so well is a real credit to everyone who's been involved in the organisation.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I don't know anything about baseball, but didn't a baseball team recently have 12 or 16 players test positive in a quick succession and have to just shut down everything? They seem to be handling it with the appropriate degree of seriousness, I think, and they are taking small steps to getting it back to what could be considered normal. But let's get into things that are relatively normal and actually talk about some games. So last night, the Rockets put away the Bucks in a very close game. What were your takeaways from this? Is this the Rockets? I know that you're particularly intrigued by super small ball. Is this Daryl Morey's, Opus Dei? Everything has come together for him now.
I think it's still hard to say. I mean, we're talking about how the games matter now. For the Bucks, they still don't really matter. So I don't think they were going to kill themselves or will be absolutely desperately miserable that they lost the game. But the thing that's interesting for me is how the Rockets are challenging conventional wisdom of how we think about basketball, in that they can dramatically lose the rebounding battle. So looking at that game, so in the game, the Bucks had 65 rebounds, the Rockets had 36, and yet it didn't really matter because of the number of threes and the high variance that brings. And I think that's how you need to think of the Rockets, in that they'll have an incredibly high ceiling, but they'll also have a really low floor because of the variance that shooting that number of threes brings. In games where they shoot well, they'll literally beat anyone. In games where they shoot badly, they could lose to the worst team in the NBA. So it doesn't prove much to me, other than they can beat anyone in one game. Let's see them do it in a series where a team can plan to play against them.
So, and that's an interesting point that you make there. That the biggest detraction from this specific philosophy is, well, let's see how they handle a 7-game series where teams can scheme for them. I'm not. The more I watch it, the more and more I'm not convinced that scheming over 7 games is going to make much of a difference. Like you say, a lot of it's shooting dependent, and how well they're hitting from 3. Just for reference, the Bucks took 35 threes last night and made 9. That's shy of their season averages. The Rockets made 21 of 61 threes. That's mad. They shot 61 threes. And if you look at the stats, field goal percentage wise, 48.9 from the Bucks sounds great. Field goal percentage wise for the Rockets, 39.6, and yet they win shooting less because of points per shot essentially, and the 1.5 increase on a 3. So it's just, we're seeing more and more of the game become about threes, and I think this whole hyper small ball is almost the magicians, what's it called? Where they sort of they distract you. They take your attention one way while they're doing something the other way. They're literally saying, "We're tiny. Come inside and beat up on us because we're going to smash you on points per shot." What would you do differently? Because if you are a team like the Bucks, who are not the greatest 3-point shooting team in the league, I think they're around 17th, so they're below average in terms of their 3-point shots. And again, I'm aware they will only meet in the finals in the playoffs. But if you are not a strong 3-point shooting team, how do you handle these guys?
Well, for the thing for me is, and why they're so hard to play against, is because they are different from every single other team. And I think teams and players get into habits during a regular season, and even now they will have been playing every few days in these scrimmages leading up to these games, where you run your plays in certain ways, you expect the defense to do certain things, and you expect everyone to be running similar things on offense, because a lot of the NBA does run quite similar offenses now. And even guys you expect to be able to exploit small teams like that, like Porzingis or Brook Lopez, for example, as we've seen in 2 games, they're so used to being perimeter focused now that it doesn't feel natural, and they're not really in rhythm to do that anymore, either from a team perspective in terms of the Bucks aren't just going to start endlessly post feeding Brook Lopez all of a sudden, and Porzingis, I think probably the most disappointing part of his game is actually he has such a high center of gravity that smaller guys can actually really bother him in the post on defense, which seems weird for a guy that size. But the Rockets just do something so differently from other teams that playing them in a one-off is really difficult. And that's what I was saying. I'm interested to see in a series where maybe teams do go away from their regular strategy just to try and exploit those matchups more.
I can see teams like the Lakers being able to handle them more effectively, where they have the guys like AD who are the de facto big man and who is capable of stepping outside and shooting threes and not being sort of goaded into the come inside and beat us that way. I think it kind of exploits, and you're right, it is only one game and it didn't mean anything to the Bucks who have locked up the one seed, but it kind of it emphasises Giannis's difficulties shooting from outside. He went 2 of 5 last night. They sagged off him constantly, encouraging him to take that. And it really just feels to me that without that evolution in his game, that could be the one sort of tripwire for the Bucks and their chances of champion success. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's just like one of the interesting wrinkles with the Bucks is whether in that kind of matchup that becomes a shootout, Chris Middleton needs to shoot the ball even more. He's played incredibly well this season. He shot the ball incredibly well, and when they get into these high points games, you almost need more from Middleton, even as good as he's been.
Mm-hmm. Almost feels to me as well like DiVincenzo and Pat Connaughton, who are filling the de facto void left by Brogdon. Brogdon was, he was in the 50-40-90 club. This is a guy who can score. They're kind of still missing that guy. They've got people like Wes Matthews who can light it up from outside and still does the awesome 3 archery thing. He's been doing that since Portland days. But it just feels that as a team, in a league where the 3 is so important now, this is the chink in that armour. Okay.
It's interesting as well. Sorry, just to have one last point on that. They have Kyle Korver on that roster as well. He played over 18 minutes in that game and only shot 2 threes. If you have Kyle Korver on the court at the age he is now and he's only shooting 2 threes, you've gone wrong somewhere.
No, I think that's fair. There was another good game last night. I say good game. I struggled with some of it, and we'll get into that. But the Blazers lost 128 to 124 to the Celtics. The first half, it had all the makings of a blowout. I think at one point there was like a 28-point lead for the Celtics. It looked like everything was done and dusted. But the Blazers rallied back behind a huge third quarter, took the lead, and it went right down to the wire. Did you see? What were your takeaways from the game? How good are these Celtics, or is this just a case of the Blazers still aren't quite good enough? Where did you fall after this game?
I like both of these teams for different reasons. The Celtics I like in that they have such incredible depth and youth, in that you can't really tell from game to game or night to night, or depending on the matchups, who's going to lead them in scoring, and it doesn't really matter on that team because you've got between Tatum, Brown, Kemba, even Hayward on the right night. It doesn't really matter who's going to lead the team in scoring from any particular game, and it allows them to play quite an equal opportunity offense that's difficult to play against. For the Blazers, I feel like the tougher the games they get in, the more and more they become reliant on Damian Lillard, who is astonishingly good to the point where you can't leave him out of any best point guard in the NBA conversation anymore. But they're still too reliant on him for scoring.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the issues they've had for a number of seasons now. For a long time, I think 45% of the scoring was coming from combined Lillard and McCollum, which isn't great from two undersized guards when you start to go against bigger units. Nurkic has been fantastic since he's returned. He looks almost back to what he was, and he had a solid stat line last night: 30 points, 9 rebounds, 5 assists. I almost feel like this game was, well, the game was the Blazers for the taking, the way they rallied back and took the lead. I kind of feel this was mismanaged by Stotts, who I realise I mentioned earlier as someone who should have got a passing glance in the Coach of the Year discussions. But did you see the final play? He essentially ran where they were down by 3, could have tied the game and settled for an open Nurkic finger roll to bring themselves 1 point shy of being on equal terms with 3.5 seconds to go. That just felt like a incredible misjudgment of the situation. They had no timeouts left, so even if they'd somehow got possession, the likelihood of it being in the front court with time to take a shot was poor. Am I being overly harsh here because I like to heavily critique teams I like?
No, I think that is fair. I think without kind of being in the huddle and seeing what the intention was, you don't know whether there was meant to be any amount of misdirection or how the play was exactly drawn up or what the thinking was. So I tend to give guys the benefit of the doubt in the scenarios when I don't have the full picture. But no, I think you're right. From what we saw, it didn't look great.
And on Boston's side, obviously a lot of love going to Tatum, who got 34 points. Jaylen Brown himself had an astonishing fourth quarter. I think he had 16 on his way to 30 points. That is an enviable pairing for any franchise to have. I don't know what it is about Tatum. He has these incredible highs. You know, we looked at it in sort of February, March, where he was suddenly in the MVP chatter, and vastly different how he'd started the season. But he also seems to have these dips in form, significantly lower than someone like Jaylen Brown, for example, who I think is more on a level plane the whole time. The highs aren't as high, but the lows aren't anywhere as near as low. Do you think that Brown gets enough love? Do you think he will ever get enough love? And how valuable is he to that team?
He is as important to that team as any other player for me. I think his two-way play is incredible, and yeah, I completely agree. You know what you're getting from him night to night. He can play a number of different roles. I really like the pairing of the two of them in that they're essentially a younger Kawhi and Paul George sort of long, rangy forward duo. They're able to play bigger than they are in terms of making up somewhat for the lack of bigs in Boston, which I think is their biggest weakness. When you see, I like Tice for what he brings effort-wise, but we saw in a game early matched up with Steven Adams how giving up that height and weight, he doesn't do a great job necessarily. Cantor is going to be Cantor, who we know is going to be incredible offensive rebounder, but give up just as many on the other end. So yeah, pick your poison with those guys. But yeah, Jaylen Brown completely underappreciated outside of Boston fans who I think unanimously love him.
So would you then, would it be fair to draw a parallel between the Rockets and the Celtics in terms of the void as in the post with big men? There is a void there. They're going to struggle with dealing with bigger teams, and the way around that then is to just rely on the versatility of these guys. Like, because that has been said about Boston before, that the big lack of big man is what their trouble is. But to me, it's like this is just part of the natural evolution of the game. Yeah, you're going to lose a couple, 2 teams with big men, but we saw it with the Warriors. You don't need a big man to win a title. If you have versatile, athletic guys who can switch, they are much more flexible and much more capable of controlling the flow and tempo of a game over a series than a team that is positionally rigid.
I completely agree with you, but they haven't lent into it like Houston, where you can imagine if their roster construction was a little bit different and the minutes that Tice played were additional minutes between the forwards and Marcus Smart say, and really they just like didn't even attempt to play a big, then I think that would actually be acknowledging it. But they're kind of right now they're kind of still trying to play traditional bigs in significant minutes. Who maybe you're better off not doing that.
It was noticed on my part that I can't even talk today. I've got to put my teeth in. That the Blazers tried to go for a traditional unit, and that is what put them in the hole in the first place because they just couldn't keep up. Let's move on then to a bit of sad news. Actually, Jonathan Isaac, Magic forward, tore his ACL in his left knee yesterday. It's been a conversation all over Twitter. Should he have been in the game at this point? The Magic were up by... the game was in the bag, essentially. There was 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They were up by close to 30. And it looked like a normal move down the lane, just landed awkwardly, fell grimacing, holding his knee, and that's him essentially done, well, certainly for this year, possibly for the whole of next season, given the timing of it. And he'd only just come back. He'd played 32 games prior to injuring that same knee, and had just come back. This was his second game back. Should he have been in the game, and how big is this for Orlando's chances of any sort of success in the first round?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, personally, I don't think they had a huge amount of chance in the first round anyway. I think they've got a fun team. They're not going to compete with the top teams in the East as constructed. Whether he should have been in the game or not, I think it's a tough one. It's easy to say looking back after what's happened and he's got an injury. The strangest thing about it for me was I was watching a video earlier, and it was Derrick Rose actually had an almost identical knee injury where he kind of jumps into a hop step and his front knee gives out, which is where the injury occurs. Complete sort of freak incident. No real contact involved or anything like that. And I also wonder if it's one of those things we talked about where before these games started, whether it's the type of injury that is to do with coming back from injury, obviously, but a conditioning thing as well, where had they had another few weeks prior to competing, whether they'd be in slightly better shape, a few more reps, whether this sort of injury would have happened. But yeah, I don't think there's a conclusive answer to whether he should have been out there or not. It's just really unfortunate. He's a good young player. He's very versatile. He's like a proper modern big in that he protects the rim well. He moves so well. He can handle the ball. I really like his game. So it's a shame for Magic fans and the team. They've got a lot of like different guys in that front court who offer different things, but nothing quite like Isaac. So yeah, a real shame.
22 years old, potential all defensive caliber talent. This guy, so it's a huge loss for them. I think the suggestion that he shouldn't have been in the game is, as you say, it's very sort of revisionist. It's hindsight is 2020. I mean, he'd logged, as I said at the start, 32 games he'd already played. He then missed everything till the restart. He came back the first game, played 16 minutes. He was only at 14.5 in this game. Essentially, the game's in the bag. But if you want this guy to be contributing, in 3-4 weeks' time when the playoffs roll around, he needs to be getting reps and he needs to be getting his wind, essentially, to be able to go the length of a playoff game. And the only way you can do that is by being on the floor. And I get that the game is in the bag, but this guy needs the reps. He hasn't played in so long. It's horrifically unfortunate. It really is. But in this instance, I don't blame the coaching staff. It's not like they weren't playing him unnecessarily long minutes or anything like that. It's just a horrible, unfortunate incident. Long-term wise, obviously the people like Aaron Gordon, you mentioned sort of the loggerhead of forwards they have there. Aaron Gordon has been in trade talks constantly. Do you think this influences what they do this summer in terms of sorting that front court out?
I think it depends. They're in an awkward position where they they struggle to play everyone as many minutes as everyone should play on that team, because they have a lot of guys who are all good players, but collectively they're not good enough. So how they attempt to address that is an interesting dilemma. I mean, the obvious thing to do is try and trade in some of these bigs and forwards for guards where they're a little shorter. But whether it's always a case of what do you get back. So I think they're not even in a position where you pick up one player and they're sort of instant contenders. So you could argue they're almost in talent acquisition mode still, where until they get like a single actual like complete game changer of a player, anyone could or should be moved to make that happen. So yeah, it's shame for the home team essentially in the bubble not to be for it to be their year probably.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assessment. Hopefully he can return to the floor, with good health and at good speed. But it sucks, such 22 years old. It's not a good injury to have if you rely on athleticism and things like that. So hopefully he comes back quickly and healthily. Let's get on to some other topics. We're going to go to a couple that you actually came up with. So obviously the NBA is trialling a few new things at the minute. We've got the baseline cams. We've got a new look court. We've got wider sidelines and end of court. But it's not just that. The way that the teams are playing is different. Now, there are a couple of things you wanted to pick up on. So I'm going to turn it over to you at this point. So let's roll.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I wanted to bring up was I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast earlier today, and one thing he was saying that I really agreed with was how many really good games we've had in terms of like as a percentage, the number of actual like really good games for the end of an NBA season has been disproportionately high, and the major reason for that is the bad teams aren't there anymore. So, and you can imagine it would be even better if the Nets and the Wiz had turned up with their proper rosters for this. There would actually be it would have been sick in terms of the games we were seeing now. Mm-hmm. What this comes down to me, what it made me think about was there's still way too much incentive for teams to be bad and for the second half of seasons at times to be completely thrown away by teams. And so I was thinking, so how does the NBA fix that? It's gone on for so long, and teams have got so used to working this way. And so one thing I was thinking of, and I want you to be my biggest critic in pulling this apart, but the idea I came up with, which is a little bit brutal maybe, but I'm taking it to the extreme here, that what if the draft was we thought about it differently, and every single team, apart from the team who wins the championship, has an equal chance of winning the lottery in the following season. And the champion doesn't even get a first-round pick, because the whole point of the draft is obviously to try and address competitive balance. But what I think it would lead to, and what I'd be excited to see, is the best young players joining teams who are already good, and you get these strange examples where, because of how contracts work and the rookie scale deals, you could see some like incredible super teams forming that completely change the landscape from one year to another, instead of always seeing these like 18 to 20-year-old guys having to suddenly pull a terrible franchise from the bootstraps on their own, which outside of like a few like elite GOAT level players, it never really happens, and you end up like seeing them miserable for the first 3 or 4 years of their career. And the thing on the other side of the league, I think it happens, is as teams would get eliminated from playoff contention, they'd kind of wind off anyway, understandably, but you wouldn't see the like, oh, we're halfway through the season and we're out of playoff contention. It's actually in our interest to lose as many games as possible at this point. So that's why in the season you see so many like 30-point blowouts, because one team actively doesn't even want to win. And I just think sport should not ever have that element of like incentive to lose.
I think it's an excellent idea. It is a roided up version of something I once raised, and I don't know if it was in an article or on the pod, which was essentially to level. It didn't go as extreme to everyone bar the champion had equal sort of opportunity to get the first pick, but it went to the point of, well, let's level because they sort of smoothed it out recently. Where the odds of getting it dropped to 40.5% if you were the worst team in the league. My suggestion was smoothing it out more, and actually for those teams that are in 8th or ninth, you get a bonus sort of percentage chance of getting it if you went from the 9th to the 8th seed sort of thing. So to encourage that race towards the end of the season. So I'm all on board for this. I think this is a great idea. I think it would never happen, obviously, if we're being realistic, because you would need essentially half the league to vote against their own interests, which, when you need a 2/3 majority to pass in the NBA Board of Governors, probably isn't going to go down too well. But I think something needs to be done, because tanking sucks, and it creates all these weird things towards the end of the season. If you have the weighting of your schedule, obviously can be impacted if you suddenly have a run of teams that are dire, and you suddenly have an artificially inflated win record that might put you above someone who played them whilst they were playing at their best when they thought they had a chance, and now have to go and slog through all the top tier contenders as well. So I have absolutely no issue with that being something if it were to be introduced, because tanking needs to stop, needs to be disincentivized. That's can't even talk again. De-incentivized. I can't talk. I'm not even going to say it. It needs to be. It needs to be stopped.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think the NBA acknowledges it in that it was so disapproving of Sam Hinkie and what he did in Philadelphia, taking it to the actual complete extreme of season after season being so open about what they were doing, and it was actually a good thing for the franchise in that they ended up with the good players they have now. But that shouldn't be the way to find success, in that you have to completely bottom out and have years of misery.
How do you think teams that don't necessarily try and tank, like the Grizzlies, for example, whose team naturally atrophied with age, and they went into a rebuild, how do you think those teams should feel if they suddenly, the chances of them bouncing back, particularly when they're in small markets, is marginalised? Because that kind of that side of thing feels unfair. They weren't tanking, they had to rebuild, and they got lucky with Ja.
Yeah, and I think the real emphasis in this environment, actually, there's two things I'll talk about. One, particularly bringing up Memphis and the likes of Indiana or Milwaukee or smaller market teams. It's often thought of that the only way they actually get superstars most of the time is through the draft, and whether what I'm kind of putting forward would actually make it even less likely that they end up with the type of talent that like Milwaukee has now in Giannis, for example. But the thing I think does happen is when there's no incentive to lose ever, there's such a greater emphasis on winning or squeezing extra wins and performances out of players that the whole model at the bottom end of the NBA changes, in that when there's no reason for a team to win 15 games ever, the coach or the players who can get you to 40 wins and sort of fight for the 8th seed, and there's actually that just means you've had a better season than the team who bottomed out deliberately and now maybe get a superstar, which is kind of the argument now, that what's the point of being the 8th seed and bouncing in the first round every year, where that's the wrong way round for me. Playoff basketball should be meaningful in itself. And we've kind of gone away from that, where it's if you're not a sort of home court advantage level team, what's the point? You may as well dismantle everything and start again, which it kind of doesn't make sense in my mind.
Yep, I agree with that. If there's a loophole, I say exploit it. If you take away the loophole, it'll make the game better. Completely agree with that. So you had another one for us, which is slightly less serious.
Yeah, I described this as my silly nonsense topic, which is pretty much how I live my life, actually. just thinking about silly nonsense and emphasising it whenever I can. And I saw my favourite tweet of the NBA bubble so far was Daryl Morey with a photo of Jeff Van Gundy from his commentary position. And what he said was that he was essentially comparing him to Magneto within his plastic prison, which, listeners, if you're not nerdy enough to know who Magneto is, he is a Marvel supervillain who fights the X-Men, who controls metal. So when he's captured, they have to keep him in a plastic prison so he can't escape or manipulate metal around him. So my question for Mike is, if he had to compare another NBA media member to a fictional supervillain, who he would choose?
Firstly, that when you shared that tweet this morning, it was incredible. It made my day. I'm not going to lie. It was possibly the best thing I've seen in a few days. Save for the fact my son turned 2 at the weekend. That was a pretty awesome thing to see. But but barring that, this was pretty up there. I had to think about this, and first off, I misunderstood it. So I didn't realise it was supervillain. I just went with Marvel hero to start with, and I imagine someone like Chris Vernon of The Ringer being Wolverine, just because he's got that.
Nice.
I can imagine him chewing cigars and wandering around in a vest and jeans constantly. He sounds like he does that anyway. I just think that sort of suits him, that raspy voice as well. But then when I read it was fictional super villain, I went a bit left field. Woj to me is the NBA equivalent of Baron Silas von Greenback from Danger Mouse. I can just see him spinning around working from home in his chair with a little white cat on his lap as he's collating all his data and information. So they're my two. Did you have anyone?
Yeah, well, first I'm going to talk about your choices. The Chris Vernon one I like, and there's even something there that you didn't even bring up in terms of, I think Chris Vernon in particular is known for his voice and his appearance not necessarily matching up. And he looks like he's about 20 years old, despite not being much older.
He's like mid-40s.
Yeah, and Wolverine with his power to regenerate, I think, and he's essentially like 200 years old or something, Wolverine. So, yeah, I think that's a very good comparison.
I can't believe I forgot about that.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up Woj as well, because he was one of mine, but I actually had him as Thanos in that he regularly essentially clicks his fingers and the whole NBA world stops. And my only other one was Kenny Smith as Nick Fury, who in the Marvel world has to kind of operate as an intermediary between superheroes and the government. And I think that's essentially the role Kenny plays between Shaq and Charles Barkley and the network.
They're excellent. Oh, that's good. Yeah, awesome. Cool. So out there, if you're listening, if you have any NBA media members that you think you could do a better job as identifying them as fictional supervillains, let us know. That was quality. I enjoyed that. Thanks, Nick. Let's move over to Discourse on Discord. So this week, we're getting close to the 100 members mark. We just had someone else join, I think, during the pod. My phone went off. Yep, someone else has joined. Excellent. So come and join us. It is discord.me/doubleclutch. This week, one of the things we were talking about were shoes that deserved to be re-released. And this is something you're a big fan of because you're a bit of a sneaker fiend. What were your choices and what sort of shoes came out that you weren't expecting but you think are actually really good shouts?
Yeah, so the thing that sort of provoked this debate that I started on Discord was seeing the Fila Grant Hills from the 90s re-released that I really wanted at the time and never had. So I really liked that, and it made me think, like, what other shoes from either that or earlier or even later time periods deserved a re-release. And Matt Hardy, UK Nets fans, not only shares his name with a WWE wrestler, but also, I believe, had a sense of humour when he immediately, within seconds, shared the the Kobe's that Adidas made that were inspired by the Audi TT. Probably, I think I'm going to throw it out there. Probably the ugliest signature shoes that were ever designed.
100%.
But others that came up were like all of Vince Carter's shoes, pretty much, with him having just announced his retirement. I brought up the Air Command Forces, which are like the Billy Hoyles from White Men Can't Jump. The Converse Aero Jams, which were Larry Johnson's. Some ugly Shacks that I remembered being my first ever pair that I'd like saved up for and everything. Some Air Pennies. Yeah, did you have any, Mike, that you thought were kind of ones that you were like desperate to see back?
Yeah, there are two for me that are not Jordans, because I'm always a fan of Jordan re-releases, particularly 11s. But the first ones are the Air Zoom Flight 98s, which were the gloves essentially. And I desperately wanted them when they came out. They got re-released, I want to say around 2013. And I remember playing in just a local league game and lining up for a free throw next to this guy who was wearing the white version with the black tick on it. And I was just sort of, as you're tired, your hands are on your knees a bit, and the first free throw doesn't matter, it's okay, so it's fine. So I'm just chatting away to him, and he must have got really weirded out because I was far too gushingly complimentary about his shoes and fanboying them. But I'm desperate for them to come back. After the conversation, I went and Googled them just to see, and they're actually rumoured to be coming back at some point this year with like the shroud that it's zipped up in is going to be mesh that you can see through. So they brought out, do you remember the monkey claw that was on Peyton's, which was essentially an ankle stabilizer and stayed on the next few Peytons, and it's essentially just like that, but like long fingered like a monkey hand. You can see that in Sonic Green inside it, so I'm just like, I might have to cop them, assuming I can actually get them with the way the sneakers app work now. Then there was also the Air Uptempos 96. Most people remember them as Scottie Pippen's shoe, which were black with Air just written in that really sort of fat 90s writing on the side of the shoe. They were the two for me. They're always the two. If they ever come out, they're the ones that I am desperately seeking permission to purchase. But yeah, no, I thought it was a great debate, a great chat, and some great shoes came out there. Like I've never been an Adidas fan, but I almost, I wobbled when those I think they were the T-Mac 3s, the one with like the shell toe that curved around the side. And I seem to remember another pair of T-Macs, that might have been the 4s, that tightened up in the heel. There was some weird little feature on them like that.
I remember you bringing those up, and I don't remember those. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what those were.
I'm gonna have to Google them. But anyway, okay. So that was Discord discourse. We've had a few listener questions come in, so we'll jump straight into them. So Tommy Jr., do you think Zion's restrictions are helpful or damaging for not only him but the team's success as well? Also, do you see problems with how long he can last physically in the league?
So I guess I'll treat that as two parts. The minutes restrictions, the thing that was interesting, I think, and I saw a lot of people comment on it, including Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer and our own Josh Coyne, I remember tweeting about it as well, in terms of if you've got a guy on a minutes restriction, why would, and he's one of your best players, why would within those minutes they not include the crucial closing minutes of the game? Which I think is a valid critique there. But I think a lot of it is also, it's a little bit like we talked about with Jonathan Isaac, and this is why the two parts of this question are linked. If Zion played more minutes and got injured again, they'd be criticised for playing him too many minutes. So no doubt there's a element there that they're inevitably going to be better with him on the floor, more minutes, but the reason minutes restrictions exist is to minimise the risk of injury and to get him back in the right level of fitness and conditioning to play. So, I think the minutes restriction inevitably harms the team, but I don't think they have much of a choice. They're listening to the medical staff and the trainers that they have, so it kind of makes sense. How long he can last physically in the league is a very good question, and one I was asking before he came into the league. And I just want to stress here, whenever these sorts of topics come up, having an opinion one way or the other doesn't mean you want it to happen. Obviously, you really don't. But his injury history from his college career to the NBA, with his size and the explosion he has, any guy that we've seen even comparable in the NBA, like Blake Griffin or Larry Johnson or any of those like really big power forward types,
Thunder Dunkers
has tended to struggle a little bit. So we can only really hope and pray that Zion stays healthy, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. You don't mortgage the franchise's future by playing him heavy minutes to try and possibly make the 8th seed, where realistically, are you getting past the likely Lakers or the Clippers? You just don't. You set yourself up ready for long-term success with this guy and try and minimise the risk at this moment. In terms of his physical form, it'll be interesting. Blake Griffin's the first comparison I draw as well. Look at how high-flying he was in his early seasons. Look at him now. He's still capable of getting up, but his role has really changed and limited. He's had to evolve his game to be able to shoot more from outside. And that's almost what you want to be encouraged. What I would expect you would want to encourage Zion to start doing now. I mean, maybe he has been, because his debut, and he hit 4 threes almost within a short period of time, and it wasn't something that was ever thought to be part of his game. And certainly in pre-season, we didn't see him shoot anything outside of 2 feet. The guy is phenomenal, but I don't know how long those joints can take that stress, and that does concern me. Fingers crossed he can last a really, really long time. We've seen other players adapt from being explosive stars to being more all-round kind of players. And I'm not suggesting he has to do that straight away either, because God knows I love a thundering dunk. Next question from our very own Hugh Hopkins. How sad will you be when the Spurs knock out the Grizzlies for the final spot in the playoffs? And just before I let you answer that, I will point out that since we cheekily mentioned asterisks to him 2 pods ago, he's refused to come back on the pod. So public apology to Hugh Hopkins. Please come back. We miss you. We love you. But how sad will you be when the Spurs knock out the Grizzlies for that final 8th seed?
2-game win streak for the Spurs. It's a classic environment in which the Spurs will do well, because there's obviously such a system team. Popovich, there is nothing that man has not seen or coached against. And if any team was going to come in flying here, the Spurs had as good a shot as anyone. So, I mean, they're still a few games back from Memphis. And would it surprise anyone? I don't think so. But sorry, Hugh, I don't think there's many neutrals out there who would want the Spurs to be in there over seeing Ja Morant playing playoff basketball. So
I think out of 10, I'd probably be a 4 on the sadness if they got the 8th seed. Maybe between a 4 and a 6. That feels like quite a big swing though, because I like the idea of Pop's streak remaining intact. I like that. And if they did make it, I could also stick an asterisk on it, because they only made it because they got into the bubble. They played last night against the Grizzlies, won by 2 points. They're in a back-to-back against Philly tonight, so that could be a big momentum changer. But we'll see. I won't be that sad if they make it, but I'm not convinced they will. Post up 323. Do you think the NBA will review how close the crowd and cameramen are at a standard NBA game? Seems like the players have more room to hustle and do work now with this new setup. So what's your take on that?
So I love Railcam as a starting point, which is only enabled by the front row on one side effectively not being there. I think from a viewing on TV and a players and a number of different ways, it makes sense to rethink where those seats are and where they're not. From a financial perspective, it really depends. And for that to make sense, the NBA would have to find a way of commercializing the things like the camera angles they're able to get with like new locations of where to put cameras and stuff, whether they like sell particular replays to particular networks and that sort of thing, essentially the money would have to make sense for the teams hosting the game and the NBA itself for those incredibly expensive seats to be removed.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing for me as well. I believe the revenue split in terms of for ticket gate receipts is something like 45-45%, with the franchise retaining most of that income. That's going to be a lot of that coming down, because they are the stupidly expensive seats that are just thousands per game. And if you start impacting the smaller market teams like that already struggle, and I know they'd have to put something in the CBA essentially which improved the level of the revenue sharing that already exists. I like the fact it's set back. I wonder if they could do something where you essentially remove the front two rows and had the cameras underneath the front, like as if it was like a raised stage almost. So they were there, the crowd were there, but just slightly higher, and then the rail cam was underneath. I wonder if you can do things like that. But again, you'd have to start reconfiguring or redesigning, solid structure arenas and things, and that's going to cost into the billions. And I don't know. Maybe the Clippers will do something with this new build arena they're doing, and it will slowly drip through the rest of the NBA. But I can't see it if it's a question of finances that the NBA would do it. I'm enjoying the rail cam a lot. I'm still waiting, like, worriedly for. Did you see Luka's near miss where he almost got taken out by the rail cam? I'm worried at some point someone is going to get leathered by that. Although you'd think that's manually controlled, so someone should just be able to move the joystick back to the other way so it doesn't just wipe out an incredibly talented basketball player. Next question from Jonah. How silly is TJ Warren going to make Jimmy Butler look in the first round of the playoffs? So for those who aren't aware, TJ Warren dropped 53 the other night, which was a massively unexpected output. And earlier in the season, back in March, just before the league shut down, he got into it with Jimmy Butler. Both of them got ejected from the game. Jimmy then posted on Instagram that it was a screenshot of the schedule and he'd circled in red when they were next meeting. So how silly is TJ going to make Jimmy look?
I really enjoyed that game, and I think the interesting thing about TJ Warren is he has something of a Jeff Green about him, where if you watch because he's tricked me a few times, TJ Warren, where I've obviously watched the right game and I've come away so high on TJ Warren that I can't imagine why teams aren't clamoring to pick him up. But it seems to be not a wide-held opinion among NBA front offices. So how silly will he make? Not many people make Jimmy Butler look silly. Something else I like about TJ Warren is he can do a serviceable Kawhi Leonard impression if you glance at the screen, and his sort of shooting mechanics aren't dissimilar either. So yeah, obviously they have the same hair.
I don't think he's going to make him look very silly at all. I think the people he's making look silliest are the Phoenix Suns, who gave him up for cash considerations, and I think that's about it. He's streaky, but let's move on to the next one, and we'll have to be quick because we are running close to deadline. Adam Connor 90. How likely do we think that the Raptors going back-to-back is? They've been my pick since January. Give me a percentage chance that this happens.
Percentage chance.
He didn't ask for that. I thought I'd throw it in because it might be quicker, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be.
You're making me overthink some maths now. I'm going to say 15%, which is probably 10% higher than I would have said before games restarted, just because I think we've really seen how good of a coach Nick Nurse is again. How reliable they are, how deep they are in talent, a little bit like I was talking about the Celtics earlier, in that they can draw on a number of players for scoring and other things. So yeah, I'm going 15%.
Yeah, I'm going to go slightly lower at 10%, I think, maybe even less than that. I think they're an excellent team. I don't think they will do well against the Bucks. I don't think they would do well against Philly, assuming Philly can pull their act together. And even if they got through those, I think there's a couple of LA teams out there who would just... if you're getting excited about beating the Lakers when LeBron had a bad game, just try and think to the last time where he had 4 bad games in a row. It's just not going to happen. He will find a way. Cool. So let's get on to the very last thing. So we're now on 10 o'clock. Games of the week. What game have you picked and why?
I have picked Lakers Rockets on Thursday night, where we talked about earlier about the Rockets coming off a win against the Bucks. I'm curious if they can keep that momentum against the top teams by beating LA as well. And I think you alluded to it earlier. If there's one team really set out to exploit that size, it's the Lakers, between Davis and LeBron, in how complete their games are, in that they can do pretty much everything as a pair. So, yeah, fascinated to see the small ball experiment continue.
Yep, good choice. I've gone with Friday night / Saturday morning, 2 a.m. Celtics versus Raptors. It's the 2 and the 3 seed meeting, both extremely good teams, as we mentioned already, both capable of making significant playoff runs, and it'll be a good chance to see them square up. They probably won't meet in the playoffs the way things are at the minute, but who knows? I don't know, they would. They'd meet in the second round. That's really bad maths from me. Good job I didn't put a percentage on it. So yeah, it could be a preview of the second round. That's it from us tonight. So thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you haven't already, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Double Clutch UK. On Twitch, we are twitch.tv/Double Clutch UK, and Discord, it's discord.me/Double Clutch. That's lots of information, but if you are listening to this back, you can rewind it and slow it down on your fancy pod player. But thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back with you next week. See you soon.